So when I see a kid who has poor tracking skills, and ADHD, we go, okay, well, they are definitely connected. I see a high correlation between the two because you can't develop good tracking skills if your attention's all over the place. And if your eyes are all over the place, you can't develop good attention. So there's a lot of overlap there, and we can train those skills and see elements of their attention improve.
In your line of work, what do you see in terms of the relationship between vision problems, the vision skills, the visual processing, and ADHD?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap, and I definitely have a lot of experience with ADHD. Both of my kiddos have ADHD, one of each flavor, the hyperactive and then the inattentive. So I have looked into everything about it. I understand a lot about it. I see it in my patients, and I really try to use what I know about it to tease out, okay, what's going on with vision versus what could be an attention issue. Because obviously I'm always in my exams engaging them at their level, and I'm paying attention to how much work does it take to engage them. Now, with a kid who has tracking problems, their eyes are moving reflexively. So if we don't have control over our eye movements, they are just jumping to the next moving bright thing. And this is where video games don't help with this because it's just zing, 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 zing. The video game's controlling their eye movements. It's not developing their eye movements. So when I see a kid who has poor tracking skills, and ADHD, we go, okay, well, they are definitely connected. I see a high correlation between the two because you can't develop good tracking skills if your attention's all over the place. And if your eyes are all over the place, you can't develop good attention. So there's a lot of overlap there, and we can train those skills and see elements of their attention improve. So we really want to see, like, okay, how much, and I like to weigh this out when I do my exams, how much could be attention, how much could be vision. I kind of use just an observation based on the kid and based on how severe I see their vision skills are to give an assessment of that. And I have helped coach parents on different kinds of treatments and alternative strategies and stuff. I'm like, this is my journey of, what I've gone through with my kiddos. And that's helped a lot. I think that, we can relate as parents. But when I see a kid come in who also has like eye teaming issues, like their eyes are not, like they're on the verge of double vision. If you're on the verge of double vision all the time and you're asked to pay attention up close, it is not going to work. You are going to find something else to do. And that's what these kids do. So you're seeing it as behaviors. And that's where kids will sometimes get misdiagnosed as ADHD because they have a vision problem. So we also, focusing, if it's blurry, if it's in and out of focus, you're going to want to do something else. So really, I look at the magnitude of the vision problems and see how it's connected to their overall performance.
Some attentional neuromeasures, like continuous performance tests that are completed on the computer, I know you know this, they have a visual modality and they have an auditory modality.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen kids who, on the visual modality, it's really not good at all. There's a lot of omission scores. They're just not seeing it, or maybe there's some impulsivity or whatever. And then you do the auditory modality and there's a significant improvement. And I'm not asking, maybe, but just from a optometrist point of view, then I guess that could be a visual problem and more
Yeah,
than an attentional
absolutely.
problem.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're training when we're training tracking is we're training visual attention. We're training that ability to keep your eye on something that is not bright and flashing. Because if you think about like how we would follow something that's really interesting. Well, then we ask a kid to read. Well, those words aren't moving, hopefully. They're not bright. They're not highlighted. They have to control where their eyes go on something that is not a desired task necessarily. So we're training their attention to stay on something. And so we do see that any test of visual attention, which I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I often will look at fixation. Can a kid hold their eyes on a small, boring, my targets for testing are a boring little ball on a stick because I want to see if they can keep their eyes on that. Yeah, I'll use little cute little rabbit pencil eraser and things like that, but I want to see how they can keep their attention on something that is not interesting because that highly correlates to their performance. And we can look at that with regards to age level.
What about kids who explain that they read the same paragraph or the same page over and over and over again. And maybe
Ah,
it's
yes.
both, but what do you think about that?
So here's another way to look at visual efficiency skills and what's going on with the whole visual process is that there's a lot of reasons for difficulty with comprehension in reading. But if you're reading and reading is a chore, and every time you read, you're struggling to track, you're struggling to keep it focused, you're struggling to keep it single, or just one of those, you have only so much energy to give to that task of reading. And a whole bunch of that energy is siphoned off towards using your eyes efficiently. There's not enough left to remember what you're reading. So it's really about this. And some people's attention is, or abilities is bigger than others. Some kids have terrible tracking and they comprehend great because their brain fills in the gaps. So just because a kid has good comprehension doesn't mean they don't have a vision problem, because the smarties, they figure it out. But when you're diverting so much energy to the mechanics of reading, there may not be enough left over for comprehension. So you had asked about some of the tests that you do. I think like you kind of mentioned some of the neuropsych testing, and there's a couple of things that I just wanted to mention that I see as connections. One is visual processing speed. You probably already figured this out, but the visual processing speed testing has a lot of tracking involved. So a kid who has low scores there, not that all of them, definitely have vision issues, but it's a bit of a yellow or a red flag that really indicate that there's some challenges with vision. So that's something to look at for when you're reviewing, when parents are reviewing the results of their tests. The other one is, and I swear, this is something you'll see sometimes of other kinds of learning disabilities. You'll see a kid be diagnosed with a nonverbal learning disability, right? So you let me know, because I don't get to see the tests, but my understanding is that those tests are basically they're visual. They're very visual, right? And so it seems like those kids who have nonverbal learning disabilities are very likely to have some kind of a visual issue. So that's the correlation I see. When I see that diagnosis come in, I know we're going to find something.
Yeah, that's a good question. On the cognitive measures, we'll look at the processing speed index, like you just mentioned, because it's all visual and there's some
Mm-hmm.
hands-on components as well. And then, yeah, the visual spatial index and the fluid reasoning
Mm-hmm.
index, which are all visual. You can see some like block building orientational errors and
Right.
shifting errors and those kinds of, and just all the visual perceptual stuff that, at least from the perspective of what we do is like okay, there may be something going on here.
Right.
That's where
Right.
that additional recommendation, like you need to go have this looked at.
Yeah, and the
Um,
kids who have symptoms, like that, they can kind of like, okay, well, we saw this in the testing, and you said that you skip words or lines, and you're eight, the kids shouldn't be skipping words or lines after age 7. Um, so if you see something else or something else on the symptom checklist, it's like, okay, we put those two pieces of information together. This might be getting in your way.
there's also a working memory, at least on the WISC, the child
Yeah.
level version. There's an auditory versus a visual working memory. There's two different subtests. So that's another thing we cue off of just as a possibility, when you're gathering all the pieces together and laying it all out. It's just another little feather that we
Hmm.
tuck in and think maybe that needs some following up. Um, I wanted to kind of bring this around to by taking a different track. How do vision problems present as ADHD? Because you talked a little bit about the vision screenings. Well, as you know, there's ADHD screenings and they're all behavioral and they're subjective. So you're
Yep.
weighting behaviors by severity. But what are some of and we talked about this in a previous episode, but what are some of the vision problem symptoms that can
Hmm.
look like ADHD? Like I think you mentioned individuals with depth perception might move to try to get a better look
Oh, yeah.
at it. And maybe that looks like restlessness, like they just can't, they just can't sit still. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we see a lot of kids who are restless and wiggly for sure. But what I'm looking for when I'm looking at the symptom checklist is a lot of it is avoidance. You might see, disruptive behaviors because they're trying to avoid the task. They might have a short attention span for tasks that are flat and up close. Then you've got your skipping words and lines when reading. They might use a finger to help guide their reading. And using a finger to help guide reading is fine in kindergarten and first grade, but second grade, we should see that the eyes can do it on their own. Sometimes these kids will also have more social, they might have poor eye contact. They might have some social skill challenges because they're not picking up. They're not, if you can't fixate on your peer or your teacher's face well enough to pick up on social cues, that could look like you have ADHD and you don't care. You might have like poor decision making and impulse control because you're not picking up on these subtle cues about how you should be behaving. So that kind of carries into a whole nother area. But basically they're overstimulated and tired, and that we know increases ADHD symptoms.
And difficulty, as you just said, difficulty reading the room. If you're not able to
Mm-hmm.
perceive that visually, you're not able to regulate yourself
Yeah.
appropriately to what's going on around you.
Dysregulation is huge, and we talk about that a lot with parents. We actually also incorporate activities to help with regulation. We have so many kids with sensory integration issues, and we haven't talked about this yet, but definitely, vision is one of the biggest senses. So if a kid has sensory integration issues and they're in OT and they're need auditory supports, there's a good chance that they have a vision issue as well because they're having trouble using their visual information, integrating it with the rest of their senses. And so sometimes kids who have vision problems get very overstimulated when there's a lot going on around them, when the page is really busy, and when you have a lot of like math problems close together, or when you start to read paragraphs versus single line sentences, that's really overstimulating for them because they can't make sense of it. And so we'll see an increase in behavior sometimes when those tasks change.
That's a great example. So we look at that maybe from an executive functioning, sort of a visual organizational perspective. But as
Mm.
you just pointed out, vision ties into it all. It's all kind of in
Yep.
there.
And a good way to tell, like if you're like, okay, well, this kid's having a hard time, we're reading paragraphs, just watch how they read if you make it big and well spaced. If that has a significant improvement for their attention on that task, then it's probably vision. Because when you have trouble with tracking things that are crowded, it doesn't have to be very crowded. I'm not talking about I'm talking about normal worksheet stuff a lot of the time. It can be really challenging for them to make sense of it. So if you're trying to troubleshoot, I will recommend taking cardstock and blocking off like other math problems or blocking off the other lines. There's the guided readers that have the tinted window, which can be helpful, but it's hard when the kids are moving a lot and they bump them. So you can try some of those supports, both to help the kiddo when they're trying to do reading work and remediation, but also to say, okay, well, it looks like we changed the demands here. It makes a big impact. There's probably a vision problem going on.
So maybe put 4 problems on the page instead of 25 or something like
Block
that.
off all but one. Honestly, sometimes when my kids were little and I felt like the worksheets came home with too tiny a print, I would take a Sharpie and rewrite the problem on a blank piece of paper and just say, here, do it that way. And I found their attention improved.
I'm thinking of some students, and we'll kind of wrap this up here in a second, but some students that I worked with back when I taught who might have been struggling with math. And so we'd go through the math facts and the 12 by 12 math multiplication table. I noticed going across, they had a really hard time, but if they went down the table, they could go much faster. So there was much faster speeds down the table than across. I don't know. Maybe that's visual, probably a vision related issue. I don't know.
It definitely could be. And I think there's some individual variability there. Like maybe something about it was neater when they tracked this way, and something about the table was harder when they tracked left to right. Tracking left to right should be better than tracking up and down after about age, 12, because we do this left to right all the time. And so we test for that when we're testing reading eye movements. We test it with numbers and just test their reading, not their reading, but their tracking skills, vertical and horizontal. And we compare that, and there's great norms for that test to say how much is tracking interfering. But yeah, I think with math, we see a lot of kids who will struggle with, is that a plus or is it a division sign? The columns might get out of order and they might kind of misalign the columns when they're doing long division. And it's often where kids will be good with math until they hit word problems. And then they start to struggle because they can't track to read the sentence and pick out the salient details of the word problem. So that's also another visual red flag.
All right. For listeners who want to connect with your practice, Denver Vision Therapy, or with you, or to find out more about your services, where can they find you?
So probably the best place is at our website, which is denvervt.com. And we do try to have a lot of information on there. I really love to educate. So we put a lot of articles on there about different vision problems. There's the symptom survey, there's research articles, there's a lot of resources there. And you can also text our office, which is a cool feature, or you can just contact us on the contact us form. And the front desk, really, we try to keep up really well with that, getting back to people quickly.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That's it from us today. As always, you can find more information as well as resources on our website, individualmatters.org. We hope you'll join us at the next podcast, where we'll continue to explore topics around successful living, learning and education, and child development, and share ways to help you live a more positive and fulfilling life.
The preceding information is not intended to provide or serve as medical, clinical, or educational advice. Individual Matters is not responsible for the accuracy of guest statements. All information should be validated independently. Please consult with your doctor, mental health provider, attorney, or other appropriate professionals before making any personal decisions for yourself or those in your care.